Hey guys, welcome to the Janus Project. I'm working through a few things here, and I just wanted to comment on this article that was just put out recently by Michael Brown. And I want to point out this simple fact. This is leading into something that we're going to start talking about on the channel soon. But what you've got is you have a transgender craze that is absolutely seducing our daughters. That's to rob the title from Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier. You have people who are trying to ban books because they're not woke enough. You have people who are trying to shut down churches, and they're using health department codes and all sorts of things to kind of get around the simple truth of you have no jurisdiction here. God established three things. He established the family, and that was pretty much the first thing he established. Then he established government, and he established a church. And each of those have fields of overlap, but each of them are we call it non-overlapping magisteria. It's the idea of there are aspects of each that do not overlap into the other. So for instance, what I do in my home, how I train my children, what I do, as long as it is not abusive, and I know that definition gets swapped around, I am the Lord of my house, so to speak. Okay, so my wife and I have had our children. We've decided to have our children with no say-so from the government. It has no place to tell us any of that. We decided to get married. Again, that should have no place for the government to tell us anything about that. And we have decided to come into a mutual agreement. We have decided to raise children, and the government really has no place stepping in and telling us how to raise our kids or what we can do with our kids or anything like that. What happens with the government is a whole bunch of people get together and they agree to a common set of principles. But then you get into this idea of the local church, and the local church has been established by God as well. The local church has a field of influence where a group of people get together, and God has said, like, you are to meet as a local church. God has said, these are some of the things that you are to do in your local church. And the government really has no place stepping in and telling you, like, hey, you need to be licensed in order to preach, or you need to follow these standards when you're preaching, or we're just going to arrest you. And so what we've seen is the government has crept into the church and tried to arrest pastors and things like that, because what they use is they use all of these other things to basically say, well, you're not following this health code, and so therefore we're not going to arrest you for not speaking. We're not arresting you for saying things you should have. We're arresting you because you're not allowed to meet because of this health crisis. And so that's the way they get in. And so I want you to see this, because this article is basically a dad who refuses to follow a court order because he's a dad with a daughter. And because of that, the court said, you will do this. And the dad said, no, I won't. And so they can arrest him for basically contempt of court. And so that's the way they're getting in. They're getting in by basically using, oh, well, you're contempt of court, so therefore we can punish you because of contempt of court. Jordan Peterson ran into this because there was a bill that was demanding that he use certain gender pronouns, and he said, no, I won't. And they're like, why? And he's like, because no Western country has ever forced you to say things. They've said, you can't say this type of language, but they've never forced you to use certain words. So I'm not going to start now. And they're like, well, but you should. And he's like, no. And the argument went back and forth. And ultimately, it got to the point where they said, you're not going to be punished anyway. And he's like, really? So what happens if I refuse to comply? And what happens if I refuse to, I don't know, go along with the punishments? You're going to fine me. And if I don't pay the fine, then guess what's going to happen? I'm going to go to jail. And it's like, well, you're going to jail for not paying the fine. Yeah, an unjust fine because you told me to use words that I wasn't required to use. And so I want you to watch this, because what's happening is you're seeing it's creeping in through other means. The government has no right to tell me what words I can use. And so when the government makes a law saying you have to use certain words and I say no, and then the government fines me and arrests me for not obeying its rules, if it is an unjust rule, it is not one that I am required to obey. Okay, that's how our government is set up. That's how United States is set up. Now, I know this article is from Canada, but I want you guys to pay attention to this, because this is coming into the U.S. Take a look at this. This is Michael Brown, a very excellent apologist. You should get familiar with his work. But look at, again, he brings it on. There are many issues in America today, from bills under discussion in Congress to fears that Asian Americans, in light of increasing hatred and violence. There are international issues demanding our attention, including the upcoming Israeli elections and the current conflict between Biden and Putin. Personally, I would rather comment on any of those subjects than the subject of this article, yet the other issues will have to wait one more day. This week's outrages are just too outrageous. We must speak out again. A father is jailed for disobeying a court order by referring to his daughter as a female. This week, a Canadian father, Robert Hoogland, was jailed for the crime of referring to his 14-year-old daughter as his daughter. That's right, because a concerned father referred to his daughter as female, thereby violating a court order. He has been arrested and put behind bars. You say, obviously, there's missing from the story. Did he abduct her? Is he not really his daughter? Et cetera, et cetera. In reality, the story is worse than you can imagine. A few years ago, Robert, whom I met with and whom I discussed the situation, learned that his daughter's school had been pushing her in the direction of male identity, claiming she suffered from gender dysphoria. Let me just put a little pause in here. You need to read Irreversible Damage. Get the book, read it through. This will make a lot more sense. All right? Get your kids out of the public school. Stop this. All right? This is the stuff that is being shoved down kids' throat. This is the stuff, especially out here in California. You can go get hormone blockers without parental consent. They are pushing that stuff. You need to watch out for this. Now, look what he says. He says, what kind of father would I be if, say, let's say in 5 years, 10 years, my daughter is detransitioning. She turns to me and says, you know, Dad or Mom, like, why did none of you do anything to stop this? I was a child. Like, none of you stuck your neck out for me back then. Okay? So what happens is this school in Canada, they changed her name in the school yearbook without informing the parents. They encouraged her to get on hormones and to work towards sex change surgery. The girl's mother sided with the daughter, but Robert opposed the decision. After all, she was a young teen and hardly capable of making life-altering decisions. This is what's happening. This gender dysphoria has moved from being a little boy problem, from like little boys, to being a junior high girl problem. This is something, if you have junior high girls, you need to face the fact, you need to wake up, you need to open your eyes, because this is coming for your daughters. Don't just say, no, you're not. No, you need to face this and you need to deal with it. Now look what it says. The girl's mother sided with the daughter, but Robert opposed the decision. After all, she was a young teen, hardly capable of making such life-altering decisions. The court sided with the daughter, forbidding her father from trying to impede her gender transition. But that was only the beginning of the story. The court then forbade him from referring to his own daughter as a she, or using her real female name, or speaking of her as his daughter. If he dared to do so, even in the privacy of their home, and I'm not making this up, he would be put in jail. All right? Now, again, Jordan Peterson, this is where it ties in. This is all coming into play. This is what he talked about back in the day. All right, several years ago when Canada passed Bill C-16, the so-called Anti-Discrimination Gender Identity Bill, Professor Jordan Peterson raised his voice in protest, and again, this is before he was shot to international fame, warning that the enforced speech of the bill would lead to situations like this. His concerns were dismissed as extreme. In response to Robert Hoogland's arrest, Peterson tweeted, this could never happen, said those who called my stance against Bill C-16 alarmist. I read the law and saw that it was, to the contrary, inevitable. I urge every parent to read Robert's words, which follow here, and to feel the pain for his daughter. Look at this. Speaking of the court ruling, this is what the dad said. They've created a delusion. They're forcing parents to live in this delusion. And he asked, what happens when the bubble explodes and the delusion ends? She can never go back to being the girl in a healthy body she would have had. These kids don't understand what kind of 13-year-old is thinking about a family and kids. I don't want to be gross here, but if you look into the science of what is the physical structure of a breast, okay, there are mammary glands, there are structures there that if you destroy them because you're having a top surgery, okay, go look at Ellen Page and look at what happened. She's now Elliot Page. She's had top surgery. She's had all this stuff done to her. She is now claiming to be a boy. If she ever tries to go back, you cannot restore those structures. It's not just a clump of tissue. Okay, it is actually very specifically designed structures that if you destroy them, there is no going back. There is no breastfeeding children. There's none of that again. It's done. All right. So what kind of 13-year-old is thinking about having a family and kids? They're not. That's why we need to protect our little kids from doing this stupid stuff. And then this, what kind of father would I be if, let's say, in 10 years, my daughter's detransitioning? She turns to me and says, you know, Dad or Mom, like, why did none of you do anything to stop this? I was a child. Like, none of you stuck your neck out for me back then. He will be able to say he tried his very hardest to the point of sacrificing his freedom. Robert shared his heart on this video before turning himself in for arrest. You say, but that's Canada. It could never happen here in America. Well, isn't it bad enough that this happens to a family in Canada? Shouldn't this concern us as well? That being said, there's no good reason why this is not going to happen in America, given the direction this country is going. Okay, now you see some stats here, some other thing. I'll link to the article so you can read the rest of it. But this is something you need to wake up, okay? There is this thing called gender dysphoria, true. But most of these girls are not experiencing the true gender dysphoria. This is a craze that is pushed by the leftists. This is pushed by the public schools. This is pushed by Hollywood. This is pushed by all of these groups. And you as parents have got to pay attention to this. Okay? Don't call this radical. Don't call this extreme. This is something that you need to understand. This is something that you need to be aware of. Otherwise, this is going to come here. We need to pray for our country, and we need to make sure that we're not following in this order. Guys, thank you for joining me. This is the Janus Project. I'm going to link to this article by Michael Brown. We need to be aware of what is going on around us, and we need to put a stop to it.